All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles de Vilmorin. I apologize, I have a slight cold, but I feel much better than I sound. So I'll try to speak as little as possible to introduce our speaker, Marvell Adams. So this is one of our Activity Strong Executive Edition. Welcome, everyone. Happy to have all of you join us. Excited to get going. So we're going to speak about how we empower your team to improve resident engagement. As I mentioned, my name is Charles. I am the CEO and co-founder of Link Senior. We're very excited to have you. Link Senior is the company that I co-founded a few years ago. We're based in Washington, D.C. We have, as we call them, very strong values. One of them is old people are cool. And the other one that you might be aware, obviously, is this Activity Strong platform, where we aim to acknowledge the amazing work of activity and life enrichment directors, empower and educate the profession as well. As I mentioned, Link Senior is this company that I co-founded. We're very excited to be touching now the lives of 50,000 older adults in the US and Canada through amazing organizations. And the work that we do is very simple. We aim to elevate engagement through the use of technology, education, an example is today's session, but really maximizing both the quantity and the quality of this quote-unquote human touch, especially in supportive living, focusing with amazing results in memory care. So as part of this series with Activity Strong, I'm so excited to welcome you again, Marvell. Marvell is our partner where on a quarterly basis, we produce exceptional content for equity and inclusion. So here are the webinar objectives. Here is Marvell Adams, who's, by the way, congratulations on your new position. Marvell Adams is the
Thank you.
CEO of the Caregiver Action Alliance and the founder and CEO of W. Lawson. With that, Marvell, I'll let you take it away, and thank you again for being back again with us.
Thanks so much, Charles. It is always a pleasure. Hi, everyone. I know I'm kind of talking out into the ether a little bit, but it's you guys are always great about engaging. So I'm very much looking forward to today. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. And let me get into just a PowerPoint to keep me on time and focused. So, okay. So empower your team to improve resident engagement. I'll just start off by saying, hi, I'm Marvell. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Caregiver Action Network, which is a not-for-profit based in Washington, D.C., but with a national reach of supporting caregivers with resources, guidance, as well as garnering respect and awareness for the roles of unpaid caregivers, or sometimes called family caregivers. I'm quite certain, just because of statistic, that 1 in 5 or 2 in 5 of you watching this right now are unpaid caregivers. I'm sure many of you fall in the category of paid caregivers as a part of your community or individuals that support residents or other loved ones in supportive living. But most likely, many of you go home at the end of the day and also provide care to others. My other hat that I wear is also founder and CEO of W. Lawson, which is a consulting firm that focuses on creating equity in aging. And I'll share a little bit more of what W. Lawson is up to towards the end of our session today. So I wanted to first talk about an empowerment mindset and what that means. When you think of who's in charge in your community, I would just be curious to know, and if you could just drop it in the chat, who's in charge in your community? And you define that as you want, whether it's your supervisor, whoever you want to say is in charge of your community. If you could just drop some of that into the chat, I'd be curious to see what you come up with. So administrator, executive director, all members, residents. Yes, I was expecting that. The board. Okay, all right, makes sense. Community members. So, understanding that a part of understanding who's in charge of the community really has to do where does the power lie. And many of you, and most likely all of you, are a part of some sort of team, interdisciplinary care team at the organization. And as a part of that, you probably garner some type of power, of which there are many kinds. And understanding who's in charge and perceived in the organization to be the decision maker is understanding where the power lies and how that power may need to be ceded, meaning giving power and resources over to, for example, the interdisciplinary care team in order to make decisions. So, what does that really mean when we're talking about ceding power and resources? What we really mean with that is if we're saying the residents, the administrator, the executive director, whomever has the power to do X, and let's say in this example, it's to get a new bus for residents. If they have the power to make that decision, if they have the power to pick out the bus, if they have the power to figure out if it's a lease or a buy, they have the power to figure out where the seats are and the handicaps, all of that stuff. Odds are that on arrival, that bus may not be what is needed by the residents and those in activities and recreation departments or health and wellness, or what the residents may want if that's done in a vacuum. So in this example, seating power would really mean saying, okay, we need a new bus team. Here are the resources, meaning the money, the organizations that perhaps could talk about and give examples of buses that would be helpful, and providing that team the opportunity to hold on to that power and actually be a accountable for taking on that action. But empowering that action really is important because without that empowerment from the person that's perceived or persons that's perceived to have that power, then taking action really becomes a difficulty, or taking that action doesn't become something that's sustainable. In other words, maybe you go through and you look through a bunch of brochures and you find pricing on the buses and you find all these options, and then you lay it on the administrator's desk and there it sits, and you're waiting for it to go to budget, and you're waiting for it to go this. And so empowering that action really is important in order to really close the circle. Clarity in the team's charter. So in this example, if the team is coming together to figure out a solution, whether it's a new bus or whether it's a new electronic medical record, you name it, clarity in the team's charter is extremely important because do you want to have a shame-free environment? I think everyone would say yes, but understanding what that means that, hey, I'm going to bring up some examples of buses or vehicles I've seen, and I really don't want to be made to feel, ashamed of the fact that I brought something up that maybe not works for our community. So having a free and safe psychological safety space. Are your rules of your team charter that everybody starts on time? Are the rules that one voice and all voices are heard? Are the roles defined? So in clarifying the team's charter, it becomes really important that the power that is given to that team is not only well defined, but the roles of individuals on the team. Aligning collective needs and interests. Each team that comes together in an organization, and again, I'll stick with the example of the interdisciplinary care team, but it really can work for any team within an organization. Aligning the collective needs and interests, meaning what are the needs of the activities professionals? What are the needs of social work? What are the needs of dining? What are the needs of administration? Whomever you want to consider. And for many of you, it may just be that it's not departmental. It's a holistic approach to the needs of the organization. But either way, aligning what those collective needs and interests are so that there's a shared success and a shared approach to challenges. Essentially, you live together and you don't do so good together is one way to put that. But when you think about empowerment first mindset, is that really getting us to a point of empowering your team to be fully engaged and have what it needs in order to take action and seek change in the organization? So, in thinking about this, my mind goes to empowerment fuels ownership mentality. So, again, I'm going to ask you to put in the chat, and maybe some of you, it'll be the same answer, but who owns your community? Where does the ownership of your community lie? So, residents, everyone owns it. The county owns it. So, if a county run home, all right. All of us, not-for-profit organization, should be the workers. Gotcha. Corporate. All right. Makes sense. Large corporate group. All right. Independent CCRC. So, okay, that makes sense. I'm pretty certain I didn't read all the comments there, but I'm pretty certain no one said, I'm the owner. Would be that there's an owner on right now, and if you are, you're welcome to make yourself known. But in general, in answering this question, it's not immediately thought, oh, well, I have ownership of this community. So what does it mean to have a empowerment first mindset if having ownership in the needs, in the strategy, in the day-to-day of the organization is not decentralized across the organization and teams? So one thing to consider, anybody a Green Bay Packer fan by chance? So Packers, diehard fans, no shade at anyone that's a Raiders fan, or well, I guess Raiders kind of moved on, but that's a diehard Buffalo Bills fan, that's a Ravens fan, that's whoever, Patriots. But in this case, one of the distinctions that Green Bay does have that's different than all the other NFL teams is that ownership of the team is within a not-for-profit corporation, and members or individuals can buy shares of the team. And so, this individual or many individuals that are in that stadium, braving cold and die-hard fans, can say that they are a part owner of that team. They have shares in it. And so when you think through what does that mean for us working in senior living and in supporting older adults, the details of that ownership becomes really important because if, and I'm making an assumption here, if right now the expectation of you is that you take ownership of your department, you take ownership of your MBS, you take ownership of your rec calendar, you take ownership of your budget, then what does that word really mean in an organization? And being able to recognize that empowering a team to make decisions and take empowering action is going to require that there's a definition of like, if I really own this and if this is really mine, then it should not only feel that way, but it should be that way. And I'm not talking about going to a lawyer and signing over documents, but what I mean is that if the challenges and successes of any given entity, project, initiative is started in one department, passed off to another, and amalgamated and turned around and made different and passed off to another. And next thing you know, hey, we're celebrating, resident life with a Hawaiian hula kind of luau thing, and it all goes not so well because there was a lack of ownership. But it was a great idea when it was made up in one department. It was an even better idea when dining got a hold of it and put all this food together. But in each step of the way, no one had necessarily ownership of that from start to finish. And so recognizing that in order to empower teams, and in order for those teams to be included in the overall universe of the community, that ownership needs to be really clear. And one way that does that is talking about is ownership and is being a part of a team, does that imply that everyone's included in that? When I mentioned before, all voices heard, one could easily make the argument, well, you can't listen to everybody. You can't take every voice into consideration. Absolutely. But when defining your team, if you're looking at the scope of what needs to get done, if you're looking at the size of the department, whatever that may be, if you're unable to have voices brought to the table within a team because it's just too large and too overwhelming, or it's just too many, hands in the pot, then is that really the team? Is there a smaller subset of that that really should be working on the core aspects of a project or a job? And is that where the power needs to lie? So understanding that the team is a part of the ownership mentality, but it doesn't necessarily imply that everyone is included. Now, having said that, we want folks to be included. We want folks to be welcome. So in considering Green Bay a little bit more, inclusion requires welcoming everyone's whole self. And this gentleman here, and I'm pretty sure that's not real ice that's hanging on him. Maybe some of it is, but frozen tundra, he is bringing his whole self to Green Bay. He is bringing his Lambo shades. He is bringing his cheese head. He is bringing it all into the freezing cold, most likely, and his whole self there. And he could be a shareholder, could be not, but he could be if he chose to be, if they had shares for sale. So understanding that inclusion requires welcoming everyone's whole self onto that team. It doesn't mean saying to a team member, okay, welcome to the team. We're self-directed and we've been empowered by administration to carry out this X project or this process in the organization. But um, keep in your lane to dining, okay? Keep in your lane to social work, and I'll stay in my lane as nursing. Immediately, the ownership mentality is gone because the team itself is starting to silo itself out. So when you talk about the staff's ability to engage on a team, belonging is really the goal. Because when you have belonging on a team, and we'll talk about what that can evolve into in a little bit, retention is the reward. So if you were to think right now, um, a place, a time where you felt that you really were included, that you really belonged, um, I would ask you, and you don't have to put this in the chat, but just think to yourself, are you there right now? And do you feel that you're included in your organization and do you feel that you belong? Um, if that's the case, then great. Odds are, why would you really want to leave? And there's some sort of external force that requires you to move across the country, or you're part of the National Guard, whatever it may be. But understanding that when belonging exists, and when inclusion is there as a part of a team construct and part of an empowered team construct, you really do get the reward of staff being retained. So that kind of pivots to empowerment and welcoming inclusion and belonging to an organization. So we've talked about a couple of different things just in the first few minutes of our chat today. Part of that has to do with who's in charge, and we talked about an ownership mentality as well. But when we talk about empowerment as welcoming inclusion and belonging, there really is an aspect of this that's hard to grasp, which is what creates your belonging. Because at the end of the day, that's what we hear, that, if I'm going to be a part of this team, then I want to feel that I am respected. I want to feel included. I don't want to end up getting something passed off to me after the fact, after something's been changed or after decisions have been made without me. Um, and how do you create that belonging? So I'd be curious to have you put in the chat, what creates belonging for you in just a couple words? And I would make the suggestion of a start of I need. So what do you need in order to create belonging for yourself in your organization? Transparency, good one. Communication, words of affirmation. Who someone knows their love languages. Respect, communication, respect, honesty, respect, communication. Yes. All of these things, I need support. I need to feel listened and heard. Adaptability. So when you really start to look at the hundreds of people that are on this webinar today, it's not hard to see there are some themes, and someone just said all the above. So transparency, respect, and communication, acceptance. So there are tons of examples of what it takes for you to feel as if you belong. The question becomes whether or not you feel that you belong on your team, and the question whether or not that team is cohesive enough in order to wield the power that it has been given. Because there's really kind of a chicken and egg conversation to be had here. One can say, well, I don't want to give too much power to the interdisciplinary care team because they'll abuse it, or they'll do something that administration won't like. And it's like, well, if we've defined what that outcome is, if we define what the process is, we define what the team is, and we've hired individuals that we believe can do this work, then there should be and must be opportunity to wield power. And in order to do that, the team really has to be have a sense of belonging that has individuals not want to kind of have parking lot conversations. So instead of talking about it in the meeting or having a conversation that's open and honest, having it in the break room afterwards, saying, did you hear what so and so said? I'm not really with it. I'm not going for it. It's the same old, same old. Even though you're a part of that team, you really are not behaving as part of that team. And that's not saying that individual's wrong. Odds are people that feel that they're included and that they belong as a part of something, um, sitting around and saying things that are detrimental or negative or malicious about that team or about that organization is minimized. Because I know for myself, I didn't come on here today to end with a synopsis on how much I despise W. Lawson. I just don't like Caregiver Action Network. I feel included and I feel that I belong within an organization. Now, one could argue, well, you're the CEO of the organization. But that's the point, that in the power that I have and in the power that administrators, executive direction, others have, giving that power over to a team requires the ceding of that power and really truly releasing it. Because if I yank it back and say, well, no, I was okay with you guys organizing that part, but I'm going to take it back from you. Again, you've minimized the person, you have snatched away the opportunity for belonging, and you've made it clear that the insights, the perspectives, and the differences that may be brought together in an interdisciplinary team, that inclusion is not a part of that conversation. And so the empowerment of a team really is set up for failure. So one thing to consider, make sure that my clicker's gone. There it is. So what if a voice is not understood? Because what I saw in the chat over and over again is, I want to be heard. I want to be acknowledged. I want to be respected. I want to be communicated with. Every single one of those themes is talking about a transfer of information, a transfer of emotion, sentiment, whatever it may be. But I want to be respected. I want to give respect. I want to communicate. I want to be communicated with. There is an urge, a hunger, and a need when someone feels that they belong in place is a mechanism for that person to be heard and for all voices to be heard in some fashion. And sometimes that may mean that the aggregate of those voices is what comes out as the one voice. Sometimes it means that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But it should not mean that the voices of an organization are minimized because there are too many voices. Because in that kind of construct, you really cannot assure anyone a space that brings in an inclusive and a sense of belonging for an organization. Because if my voice is not important enough to be heard, then I don't know if I could ever feel that I belong in an organization. And if I don't feel I belong in an organization or on a team or as a part of an initiative, then the power that I may be given doesn't really do much for me because I don't feel sincerely that it's going to be there for me. So is their empowerment mindset and ownership mentality sustainable when your voice is not heard? I would argue very, very passionately that it's near impossible. If your voice is not heard and if it's not sought out and really listened to and brought into the conversation of taking empowering action, then it's not really sustainable, even if there's an initiative to decentralize power, to move budgets around, to give X amount of money here so that that team could be self-directed. Um, so while I'm doing this, I can't really see your faces, but I would imagine you're wondering about our friend Donald Duck there. So I'm sure many of you know who Donald Duck is. And because you guys have been so good in the chat, I would just be curious to ask. Give me a couple different words that describe Donald Duck. Who is he? Like what is his demeanor? You know, if Donald Duck was on your team, how would you describe Donald Duck on your team from what you know of him? Brave, feisty, cantankerous, tenacity, funny, fussy, angry, strong-minded, sassy, opinionated, quacky. I like that. Blustery, feisty. Oh, very good. A passionate explorer. I like that. Strong-willed. So I'm seeing again a theme. Pushy. Thank you, Christina. Uh, um, Short-tempered. All of these things. I think it's hard to deny that Donald Duck does have a reputation for being a bit standoffish. Donald Duck does have a reputation for being a bit ornery at times. Uh, any idea why? Because it's not as if we'd said, you know, if Daisy Duck was here, if Mickey Mouse was a part of it, you know, if other members of the Disney family, I don't know, if the Little Mermaid, I don't think those type of adjectives would have come out. So it's curious to me. He feels second to Mickey, hard to understand when he speaks. Ooh, yeah, he's a duck. That's a good point. Maybe it's hard to understand him because he's a duck. And if you don't speak duck, then how can you hear his voice, right? So back to that question of what if a voice is not understood? So I'm going to stop screen sharing for a minute and I'm going to switch over to about a 2 minutes worth of video for us to take a look at together.
Everybody listen up! I just wanted to provide some nice
What?
Did anyone get any of that?
It's mostly context
We
clues.
get like every third word.
Nope, completely unintelligible.
I told you I didn't tell you, come on!
I don't have time for this. The Barksian modulator, able to translate neural impulses into sonic transmissions.
Buh?
It's a voice box.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Tell me so
Barksian
long.
modulator.
Buh.
Hands off of me!
You mad scientist?
Whoa, he sounds so normal.
Rubber baby buggy bumpers, rubber baby buggy bumpers, rubber baby buggy bumpers. Wow, never been able to say that before. As I was saying, Uncle Scrooge is in trouble, and it's up to us to help him. Adventure is in our blood. We face down perilous foes and endless danger every day, but we always prevail, because these ducks don't back down.
Thank you, Donald. Now, we need to...
Stage a coordinated attack. Gyro, you and your team will charge the bridge to distract Magicka's shadow forces. Launchpad, head up the air attack to draw her attention. Do you think you can crash into the bin? All right. And Beakley, while the others distract Magicka, you and I will sneak around back in my newly fixed up houseboat.
That is actually very close to what I was going to say.
And we...
We'll stay here and...
So, I don't normally sit around watching DuckTales, but I do have 3 kids. The twins turned 8 last week, and Quinn is 5.5. And I was delighted when they discovered DuckTales. I may have encouraged them a little bit, but it's a new version of DuckTales. It's not the one that perhaps some of us listen to. Maybe you're watching the new DuckTales on Disney Plus. But either way, I was watching DuckTales with them one day, and this whole story started to come out. We won't get into all the details of it, but this part of the episode really stood out to me because, wait a minute, Donald. Like all of a sudden, when Donald was understood, when his voice was heard, and when he was able to communicate to and also receive communication, all of a sudden Donald kind of seemed like a charismatic guy. He's cracking jokes. Donald seems like he became a powerful leader. Yes, Donald really went into a role of being someone that was empowered and took that power and used it in a very effective way. At the end of the episode, they did win and they beat Magic of the Spell and they got Scrooge McDuck out of the dime, in case you're curious. But at the end of the day, him being heard was the factor that made the difference for them. And so the reason I bring this back to you, and I'll bring up our slideshow again, is without having the opportunity for someone's voice to be consistently respected, heard, and brought into the conversation of a team. And so take that any way you want to: interdisciplinary, dining, activities, organizational, senior leadership, residence council, whatever it may be. If that voice is not heard, then how can that person really be empowered? So I'll give you perhaps a non-animated version of that. Is if someone has speaks a language that their native language is not English, or that they may have an accent, meaning an accent that sounds different to perhaps an American ear. Some might say, if you have an accent that sounds like you're from Hollywood, you have no accent. And if you're from the South, then you definitely have an accent, and that's coming from a native South Carolinian. But the point being is that In order for that empowerment truly to be taken on, um, that individual's voice has to be consistently brought front and center. Because if you empower a team to do a set of accomplish a set of goals to move forward with an initiative, and throughout that, you have an individual or numerous individuals within the organization whose voices have historically not been heard. One, why would they want to join that team unless they have to be on it? And we all recognize that when you're forced to be on something, you're less likely perhaps to be as engaged as you could be. And if you're not engaged, the likelihood of you feeling included and that you belong and really truly being a part of the empowerment structure of the team, highly unlikely. So if you start to peel back the onion a little bit more and recognize that um, one of the biggest issues I think we have facing our field right now is talent, meaning that we have very, very talented people in our field. We just don't have enough of them. We have very capable and committed uh, dining services staff, CNAs, nurses, rec aides, directors, you name it. We just don't have enough of them. And when you talk about how do we recruit and retain individuals and how do we empower teams to be self-directed in a way that really gives everyone an ownership mentality and an empowerment first mentality in the organization, well, that's how you really start to build the ability to retain staff. But also, more importantly, in my opinion, is we have a huge problem as well with the big wave of retirements and changes in many of the leadership roles across organizations. Many organizations seeing whether it's CEOs that have been there for 20 or 30 years and retiring, and there's being a national search for it, a supervisor who's been there for 30 years and decided to retire and is no longer there. You know, someone that's found another opportunity someplace else and decided to move across the country, whatever that may be, recognizing that if an organization is not giving power to a team, and if an organization does not have teams where all voices are heard, how do you really develop leaders? Because you saw with Donald just now, I cannot think of an instance, and I've watched a fair amount of cartoons, I'm not going to lie. I cannot think of an instance in where Donald Duck behaved in this way. Maybe sometimes when he was Three Caballeros, I don't know if you watched that one or not, but this was definitely a different Donald than I think most of us are accustomed to, especially the description that was given in the chat earlier. Donald could not be a leader because Donald could not be heard. And was it Donald's fault that he couldn't be heard? I would argue that it wasn't, because if you see his interactions, and now we're really getting into deepness with DuckTales, but if you see his interaction with Daisy Duck or perhaps some of his other friends, they do actually understand what Donald's saying. It's essentially your ear gets attuned to someone's accent. We'll put that in quotes. So the point being is that when organizations bring forth and say, well, you know, we can't just put this out for everybody. Do you have input? Okay, fair enough. Let's put some limitations around it. Let's make it reasonable. But to say that a particular set of voices, whether it's perceived by that group, whether it's in reality by from the administration saying that it's clear that this group can't have power, whatever that may be, without those mechanisms in place, you really never give the opportunity for members of that team to become leaders. And you never really give members of that team the opportunity to grow and learn and do more in the organization. Because if my voice is not important and if it's not heard, then yeah, I'm not going to really grow. But the other thing that I just can't help but mention now is that, again, Donald's persona is that he's angry, that he's mad, that he really has problems with everybody. But at the end of the day, Donald's just really upset because he's not heard. And I can imagine there's a good number of you on this that can feel that way. If you look in the category of just individuals that are historically marginalized, you could make the argument that women would feel less of their voice heard in some settings. You can make the argument that people of color would feel less heard. People with a disability or different ablement feeling less heard or feeling that they're not included. And so when we come back to this construct of understanding that empowering a team is one step in making sure that a team is able to self-actualize and self-direct. But if that team does not have the core tenets of ensuring that there is inclusion and belonging and a sense of welcome, then that empowerment really gets wasted because the voices aren't heard and it's not moved forward. So what does this really bring us to? Because you could say, well, all right, what do we do now? We've talked about that we want to create belonging, that we want to feel as if we have the ability to be part of teams that are empowered. But at the end of the day, there's one first step to consider, in my opinion. I have been reading this. Actually, I've read it a couple times and listened to it, the audiobook, a book called DEI Deconstructed. And I mention that because it's really different than what I've read before, in that, you can really just take the word DEI to the whole book, and it would actually be a story about building teams and trust and understanding how the organization can operate so that all voices are heard, and getting to the outcomes that you want, which is that if we've hired you and had you on this team, the presumption hopefully is that we want you to be here, meaning the organization, meaning the supervisor, meaning the manager. And the fact that the person accepted the offer, at least some window of possibilities there that the person really wants to be there. And so how do you nurture that? And one of the takeaways the author Lily Zhang has within the book is trust. That no initiative has much ability to be sustainable. No effort on empowerment, around inclusion, about being more equitable, really has the opportunity to be sustainable. Doesn't mean it'll fail. It can have great success, perhaps, but in an environment where trust does not exist, you really are starting from a different place for most initiatives. And I imagine you would see this yourself, that if amongst your team that there's not been a intentional or perhaps over time, bit by bit, organic growth of trust that can happen, amongst longevity perhaps, or through constructs of really being transparent, as other people mentioned, then if you don't have that aspect of trust on that team, I can imagine that some of you think to yourself, well, yeah, I can't get stuff done because I can't tell Susie Q about this because she's going to go tell the boss, and we won't really get a head start on this, and it's going to be a big problem. Um, and I will get to your question in just a moment, attendee. I like that. Um, but considering that if that trust is not there, that is the work that perhaps needs to be done first, because without that ability to recognize that a team needs to understand that the organization and the individuals within it will do what they say they will do. Sorry. So this comes down to understanding, oops, thank you. Do you trust your organization to do what it says it will do? Your team members, do you trust them to do what they say they'll do? Your manager, your business partners. And this is not, again, throwing shade at anybody. And I'm not trying to inject that, well, you must have just a trustless organization if you don't feel that you're empowered and part of a team. But what I am imparting to you, and in some ways channeling Lily Zhang from their book, is if there's not a foundation of trust within an organization or within a team, then how can you really get to a point of all voices being heard? Because bringing your full self, I don't know if I would want to bring my full self into a conversation if I don't trust other individuals to do what they say they're going to do, and to be respectful and to be transparent. And so being able to build that foundation becomes quite critical. So I'm going to pause for a minute and ask if Macon could put in the chat, if she hasn't already, a couple of the resources that I put in. Because, this was not a conversation on trust that I wanted to bring forward, but for those of you who are curious, there are a couple of resources that I would offer, including the book I mentioned by Lily Zhang. So I did see a question, and the question is, and there is another part we're going to get to in a minute, but what about companies that are committed to doing things their way, the way they always have? When long-term leadership is hesitant to change because it may be difficult or they're uncertain a new way will work. So I really like this question, and I see even some folks putting some answers in there as well. That's cool. The intriguing thing, in my opinion, is we really reward tenure within our field, meaning that if you think about this weekend shift coming up and you think about the nighttime supervisor that has been there for 10 years and is going to show up on time and make sure that the change of shift goes well and the med card is done and the residents are in the morning up and ready for that trip that are taken to Niagara Falls, whatever it may be, that individual um, is rewarded for the fact that they've been there for a long time, perhaps in the fact that they're trusted more, and you can expect that they will do what they say they want to do. But the other piece of considering that type of individual, that's kind of seen as a revered for the longevity part of it starts to bring pause into the organization, because if an organization is not measuring the average, I was going to say average age, but I would more so say measuring the event horizon for someone no longer working. So it could be that they're retiring. It could be that they win the lottery. It could be that they want to change in their livelihood and the way they seek and employment, whatever it may be. But the difficult part comes down to is the the individuals that are recruited into organizations that have not had that longevity. What happens when that supervisor that everyone beloves is no longer there? It's a fire drill. You know, if that person goes on vacation, it's like it's nuts. And so you put into the organization a lot of weight upon the individual dedication of folks, as opposed to empowering a team to be able to have a sustainable approach and keeping things consistent in organization. So back to kind of the question of asking, so if everyone's hesitant to to make change and say that it's uncertain of a new way to work, my question comes down to, you know, then when will there be space for something new? Because I don't know if anybody else is looking around or not, but our field is changing so quickly and so dramatically in ways that I think are unseen and seen, that we really don't have answers for yet. Whether that means a mentality of an organization growing, demonstratively over a short period of time and mergers and acquiring other communities, or that means maybe being more innovative internally within a retirement community, whatever that may be. But understanding that our field is very much in a bit of a state of uncertainty, uncertainty about our staff and workforce and ability to recruit and retain individuals, uncertainty about the future leadership of organizations as turnover in leadership roles, some of which are precipitated by the pandemic, starts to increase more and more. We're ending up in a situation where, okay, let's keep doing what we're doing, but are we doing that for survival so that we can make it to the next day? Which in some instances, hey, the Department of Health is walking the door. We just want to make it to Thursday, want to make it to Friday, wherever you want to be. Understandable. But that survival mentality equates, in my mind, to status quo, because we're just too afraid to change. And if we're just too afraid to change, I mean, I could put some more things in the chat around your iceberg is melting or who moved my cheese, whatever it is. But we all recognize, I think, that failure to adapt, failure to change, failure to move forward in different and innovative ways um, can many times leave an organization to be susceptible to failure or bigger challenges. The example I would give is Kodak. I used to live in Rochester, so this is a story that maybe hits home a little bit more. I didn't wasn't raised there though. And Kodak, went through a tremendous upheaval with the bringing in the shepherding of digital cameras and being able to digitally take a picture and not have to, print it out at the CVS or wherever else. But Kodak had that idea and decided, well, we don't want to bring digital forward, because if we do that, then we're going to cannibalize a whole bunch of parts of our business line here. And so they tucked it away. But guess what? Good ideas have a way of making their way to the public domain by someone. And so, if understanding that if there's an opportunity to change and an organization decides not to move forward with it, then the risk is that someone else might, and that someone else may end up cannibalizing or competing in a way with the organization that makes it more difficult to thrive. All right. So I wanted to close out at least this section, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing within the Caregiver Action Network as well as W. Lawson. But the reason I enjoy coming to do these conversations is, one, you guys are always really engaged and challenging to things I bring forward, but also recognizing these type of conversations have to happen because I don't really see a solution. And if you do, maybe worthwhile sharing or keeping to yourself because you maybe become really rich by selling it to folks. I don't know how we get to a point of stabilizing our operations, ensuring that we have the people, the humans taking care of humans that we need, that we retain staff without being openly and honestly inclusive of as many and all individuals that we can, because we need you, we need them, we need everyone in order for our field to be successful. If I juxtapose this with Caregiver Action Network, which focuses on family caregivers, the ratio of family caregivers to individuals or loved ones that they care for has been shrinking, just like in paid caregivers in the dearth of talent. So decade ago, it was for every one person needing some sort of support from a family caregiver, there were 7 family caregivers, in the aggregate, and that's gotten down to 5. And we are not going slowly towards 4-to-1 and 3-to-1. And so recognizing that whether it's unpaid caregivers or paid caregivers in your roles within your organizations, we do not have the luxury of not being inclusive. And so there is a case to be made that, yes, inclusion is the right thing to do. Having a sense of belonging in your organization is the right thing to do, but also recognizing that an organization can be imperiled by not being inclusive because you are essentially leaving in the on the table, you're leaving out in the cold, whatever you want to call it, individuals that are seeking belonging. And turning a blind eye to that, or at least not doing the work to hear what Donald Duck is trying to say and attune your voice to him a little bit more, because Donald is an amazing supervisor overnight on weekends, and he will do a 12-hour shift for you Saturday and Sunday, no holes, no fail, Christmas, doesn't matter when. You just got to tune your ears a little bit enough to understand what Donald's trying to communicate, and you recognize that he is pretty formidable when it comes to being a leader. So next, I want to share a little bit about something that I'm just over the moon excited about. So some of you have heard me talk about a fellows program that I started with a colleague of mine, Sarah Moore. And we had a conversation, probably a year or so ago about, we don't see in our organizations the inclusion and the belonging that we all seem to be seeking. In looking at the chat again, several people said, well, I don't feel like I belong in my organization. I don't feel included. And so we decided, well, if we don't see that out there, if we don't see that there's an intentionality about being inclusive, and that leaders aren't being given the opportunity to learn the skills needed in order to be more inclusive and to be culturally competent so that teams can be empowered and to be seen as their own selves. And so we developed and launched what we call the Longevity Inclusion Alliance Fellows Program. It's a group of individuals that come together over the course of 6 or 7 months, virtually for the most part, but then I'll talk about at the end, we come together as a retreat. And excitedly, last week, we launched our first cohort, what we call the Alpha cohort, of about 10, 12 individuals that come together across sections of many industries, principals at architect firms, CEOs of retirement communities, chief diversity officers, planners, even finance background, and coming together with the notion of we really want to lead journeys of inclusion either for themselves and or for their organization. And the purpose of the fellows program is really to provide that intentionality. So 5 paths of inclusion: discovering reflection, where we really focus on what is it that you are willing to accept as differences coming into your life, because there's a whole bunch of differences out there. It doesn't mean that we have to tackle all of them at once, because being culturally competent to accept the differences of someone just because you say so usually ain't going to cut it. It takes more of an intentionality around it. Each one teach one is really then taking the notion of what you've learned internally about yourself and your ability to welcome in new differences, and then take those lessons for yourself and bring along one other individual. And as part of this journey, we ask the fellows to actually think through who can they bring along in their organization or in their lives with their journey of intentionality of inclusion. Wisdom and peace really talks about how do you then settle into the uncertainty and the discomfort that is going to come from having these conversations. It's no mistake that it's difficult to have these conversations. Is also related to the fact that these conversations aren't had quite readily. That's changing a great deal, but the wisdom and peace to be able to settle into the discomfort and recognize that the only way for the comfort to come is to push through. Uh, I'll give just a really quick uh, story for myself that I gosh, I was probably 7 years old, almost drowned as a kid. And long story short, Danny, this kid, pulled me out of the pool, and I was fine. Didn't do CPR or anything like that. I was okay. But that was when I was 7. And I took my first swimming lesson maybe 6 years ago, down in the water. And you're talking about somebody that really had a pretty good phobia. And I could probably count on my hands before I took those swim lessons how many times I'd really immersed my head underwater. But recognizing that I had kids at that point, at the time the twins were born, and I thought to myself, "God, if one of the kids falls in the water, I got to be able to jump in. I gotta empower myself to be a part of the solution, because I have an ownership mentality of this. I have a stake in this, that I want the well-being of my child to be of the utmost importance. And that means I gotta push through the discomfort of the fact that, a few decades ago, I almost drowned. And so I learned how to swim decently. And understanding the wisdom and the peace to be able to step back and let the discomfort work through. Creating opportunities, because without the opportunity for an individual and a leader in particular, and when I talk about leaders, this program is open to all leaders. And what that means is informal and formal leaders. There are leaders that are individuals that have been I can think of Miss Hannah, a housekeeper at the first community that I served as a nursery administrator, and she was a leader. Okay, you understood what not to do when you came onto her neighborhood that she was in charge of. You understood that when she was on vacation, things better look a certain way when she gets back. And Miss Hannah was a force of nature. She was a leader. And so as I, consider everyone that's on the other end of this webinar, I would surmise that all of you are leaders. And so when it comes to those leadership moments, how do you help individuals create opportunities, not only just for themselves, but for others around them? Because in doing that creation of opportunities, it's bringing forth the fact that the team and the organization and inclusive nature is what we're trying to create an opportunity to move forward to bigger and better things. And so I would go back to the question earlier of sharing that, no one seems to want to change and it's the status quo. Opportunities don't tend to come knocking when things are just status quo. And so creating opportunities is a big part of growing in an inclusive environment. And then last, we focus on a courageous leadership. And we recognize that you can have all the core competencies in the world. You can go to training, you can have conversations, you can look at TED Talks, you can give speeches yourself. But if you don't have the courageous leadership to really sit down, have a conversation, invite the discomfort, figure out if you have trust in your organization, if you as yourself are a trusted entity, if your team is a trusted entity, if you have trust for others in your organization, and do you have a sense of belonging there. So recognizing that those conversations really do take courage. And I think on a daily basis, individuals come across opportunities where the lack of courage that's there, the courage that is lacking is the bottleneck. It's not the fact that the solution doesn't exist. We could imagine right now, if I asked for a show of hands, if you have a solution to a problem in your organization, if just somebody would get the heck out of the way, you could solve it. Courageous leadership requires that empowerment of that team to be able to do that and actually suck it up a little bit and recognize, maybe this will be uncomfortable for me, but maybe I have an issue with being too controlling. No, that we will. We don't have anybody like that in the field, so I don't want to say that, but so courageous leadership is a part of it. But for our cohort, the alpha cohort that started last week, we decided to start a beta cohort. So a new group of 10 to 12 individuals across the field, whether it's business partners, we even actually have owners of an IT system. There are a couple owners actually of IT or virtual reality companies. But this next cohort will be parallel to the alpha cohort. And then, I mean, maybe we'll do a delta. But at the end of that, at least as a part of it, folks will be invited to be a part of an Inclusion for Impact retreat. So for this case of our cohorts that we're developing now, the alpha cohort, the beta cohort, and if we have enough interest, delta cohort, will matriculate through four, or should I say, 5 virtual sessions that are about 3.5 hours each that happen on Zoom. And so it's highly accessible for individuals. But what we do is each of the cohorts, let's assume that there's 3 or 2 or 3 that matriculate through, come together at the towards the end of their time together to meet and to talk about what they will do in order to make an impact and be more inclusive in their organizations. I'm really excited that what we're calling our catalysts in residence, 2 individuals that I idolize, to say the least. Christopher Ridenhour, some of you may know, who is spectacular at engaging and showing others that there are ways to show your teams and your organizations that not only are you ready to take on those tough challenges and have a courageous leadership approach, but that you are able to include voices and bring in individuals and see them as people. And the other individual that has agreed to be a part of our retreat next April is Lily Zhang. So the quotes, or not the quotes, but the information I was sharing earlier, and if you can see this book or not, but it's in the chat as well. Lily, whose pronouns are they, them, will be at the retreat doing a fireside chat to bring together all of the learning that we've had as cohorts. So if you're curious for more, that QR code that's there should take you to a space where you can get more information and we can send you a program guide. But just really excited to bring some action into the space of, at least for me personally, saying, put up or shut up. Talking and having conversations is one part. Awareness and growing insight into issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion is another. But for me, it really required that next step be taken. And we have a responsibility, in my opinion, to bring others along. So I invite you and others in your organization to consider that as well. Charles?
Yes, Marvel. If people are interested in the retreat, how do they get in touch with you?
So they can either click on the QR code there, and that will take them to the website where they can put in their name and email address.
Yeah.
So right now I will put in the chat.
Okay, so by email as well. And so here is Marvel's email as well. So if people want to see it, or it's in the chat, it's dropped. But thank you so much for an amazing session, Marvel.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was very, I love the interaction you have with the crowd and always new learning. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one, which is going to be next quarter, I guess, before the end of the year, and we'll be in touch about that very soon. Thank you so much, Marvel.
Thanks so much, Charles. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Just a couple other reminders before we close. If you, again, sorry, let me back up. I dropped in the chat Marvel's LinkedIn. Please, if you're interested in anything that was shared today, Marvel has an amazing voice, great content, great connection. And so I highly recommend following if any one of you is on LinkedIn. So that's my 2 cents. In terms of upcoming events or announcements, some of you might have been on our Decoding Dementia Gathering a couple of weeks ago. We released this framework in partnership with the Center for Applied Research in Dementia, thinking about everything Montessori and life enrichment, and with our friends at Winston Communities. This is exclusive for our clients now, and it will be released for everyone, I think, in 2 weeks, about 2 weeks. In terms of upcoming events, super excited for October 3rd. Tara Jenkins is one of the best music therapists I've known. I've actually known Tara for probably more than 10 years now. And she's going to be joined by 2 professional, Megan and Krista, from OMA, which is the Opening Mind Through Arts from Miami University, the Scripps Gerontology Center. And so they're going to be talking about how we extend our staff by including residents and volunteer in creating creative arts programming. And then very excited about this upcoming event. It's later in the year. It's in December, but we are partnering for a half-day event with an organization called CFI, Center for Innovation. Some of you might be familiar with. It's the merger of the Pioneer Network and the Greenhouse Project. And so we're very excited about this partnership, and the discussion is going to be about how we reframe the culture and we create meaningful relationships for person-directed living. Again, everyone,
and Charles, as the board treasurer of the Center for Innovation, I invite everyone to engage greatly and repeatedly. We look forward to talking with you.
Thanks so much, Marvel. Yes, I forgot you are actually. That's great. Perfect. Thank you so much for the comment.
No problem.
Everyone, have a wonderful end of the afternoon, day, and thanks for connecting with us today. Bye-bye. Thank you.